You were standing on a ridge overlooking a river valley in what is now northern Sudan, around 13,000 years ago. The air is dry, carrying the smell of dust and acacia wood smoke from the cooking fires below. You can hear the low murmur of a community, maybe 100 people, as they grind wild grain and mend fishing nets. But then a sound cuts through the murmur. It's not a lion. It's not a hyena. It's a sharp, rhythmic thudding, wood on wood, but organized, deliberate. And then you see them, a line of figures moving in unison, carrying shields made of animal hide, and behind them, others with bows. They are not here to trade. They are not here to share food. They are here to kill everyone you know. Here's a question that almost never comes up, but it's one of the most disturbing puzzles in human evolution. When did our species, Homo sapiens, start making war? Not a scuffle over a stolen fish, not a revenge killing between two families, but organized, group-on-group violence, with strategy, weapons, and a clear goal of eliminating the other side. For decades, many anthropologists believed that war was a relatively recent invention, a byproduct of farming, property, and permanent settlements, appearing only in the last 10,000 years. But the evidence tells a very different story. In this video, we are going to travel deep into the archaeological and genetic record to find the real origin of human warfare. We'll look at the oldest known massacre sites, the skeletal evidence of prehistoric combat, and what chimpanzee behavior tells us about our own dark potential. We'll explore the evolutionary psychology behind why humans fight, and why we have such a hard time stopping. By the end, you'll understand not just when ancient humans started having wars, but the primal, biological wiring that makes conflict a permanent part of the human story. This is the truth about why humans fight. Now, let's talk about the deep time timeline. To understand when war began, we have to go back to a world that looked nothing like our own. The oldest, unambiguous evidence of organized group violence comes from a site called Jebel Sahaba in what is now Sudan, dated to around 13,400 years ago. This was the late Pleistocene, a time when the Earth was emerging from the last ice age. The environment was harsh but productive. River valleys were rich with fish, wild grains, and game. Human populations were small, likely organized into bands of 25 to 50 people, with occasional larger gatherings for trade or mating. There were no cities, no states, no written laws. Life was nomadic or semi-nomadic, and survival depended on intimate knowledge of the land and cooperation within the group. But here's the critical pressure. Resources were not evenly distributed. The best fishing spots, the most reliable water sources, the richest hunting grounds, these were worth dying for. And when a band grew too large for its territory, or when a drought pushed people into a neighbor's range, the stage was set for conflict. Evolutionary psychology suggests that our ancestors evolved a deep, automatic sense of territoriality and in-group, out-group bias. The human brain is wired to trust familiar faces and to fear strangers, a survival mechanism that worked well when the biggest threat was a rival band from the next valley. So why did it take so long for researchers to accept that war was ancient? For much of the 20th century, the dominant view in anthropology was that prehistoric hunter-gatherers were essentially peaceful. The noble savage idea, popularized by thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The evidence seemed to support this. Early archaeological sites rarely showed signs of violence. But this was a sampling bias. Archaeologists were often digging at sites that were used for a short time, or they were looking at burials that had been disturbed. It wasn't until the 1960s and 70s, when researchers began systematically examining human skeletons for signs of trauma, that the picture changed. The key evidence comes from three sources: the fossil record of human skeletons with embedded projectile points or healed fractures consistent with weapon use, archaeological finds of mass graves with multiple individuals showing perimortem trauma, injuries inflicted around the time of death, and comparative primatology, especially studies of chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, who engage in lethal coalitionary aggression against neighboring groups. According to science, the pattern is clear. The capacity for organized violence is not a recent cultural invention. It is deeply rooted in our evolutionary past. But here's the thing: recognizing that war is ancient doesn't mean it was constant. The evidence shows that prehistoric warfare was likely sporadic, small-scale, and highly ritualized, nothing like the industrial-scale slaughter we see today. And yet, the seeds were there. The question is, what triggered the first true war? To answer that, we need to look at one of the most shocking archaeological discoveries of the 20th century, a site that rewrote everything we thought we knew about ancient human conflict. This is so important to understand because it challenges the very idea of a peaceful human past. In 1964, a Polish archaeologist named Fred Wendorf was excavating a site along the Nile River in northern Sudan, near a place called Jebel Sahaba. He was looking for evidence of early human settlement, but what he found was something far darker. The site contained a cemetery, but not a peaceful one. Wendorf and his team unearthed the remains of at least 61 individuals, including men, women, and children. And almost every single skeleton showed signs of violent death. This was the first scientifically documented evidence of a prehistoric massacre, and it forced anthropologists to confront an uncomfortable truth. The study, published in 1968 in the journal Science, described the findings in chilling detail. Of the 61 skeletons, 24 had clear evidence of embedded stone projectile points, arrowheads or spear tips, lodged in their bones. Many had multiple wounds. One adult male had 21 points embedded in his skeleton. The injuries were concentrated in areas that suggest face-to-face combat: the chest, the back, the skull. And here's the critical detail: the points were made from a type of stone not local to the area, suggesting the attackers came from elsewhere. This was not a family feud. This was a planned, organized attack by a group that traveled to kill. But the most surprising finding was the demographic profile. The victims included both sexes and all ages, from infants to elderly adults. This is a signature of genocidal warfare, the deliberate targeting of non-combatants. In evolutionary terms, this makes a grim kind of sense. If your goal is to eliminate a rival group permanently, you don't leave behind children who will grow up seeking revenge. You don't leave women who can bear children for the enemy. You wipe the slate clean. This was not a battle for territory. It was a battle for total elimination. Now let's zoom out. What does Jebel Sahaba tell us about human nature? First, it shows that organized, group-level violence predates agriculture, property, and permanent settlements by at least 3,000 years. The people at Jebel Sahaba were hunter-gatherers, living in a rich riverine environment. They had no stored grain, no private land, no state to fight for, and yet they killed each other in a coordinated, systematic way. This challenges the idea that war is a byproduct of civilization. Instead, it suggests that the capacity for organized violence is part of our evolutionary heritage. But here's the part that affects you. If hunter-gatherers could commit genocide 13,000 years ago, then the psychological machinery for war is not something we learned from farming or cities. It's something we inherited. And that means it's in you, right now sitting in your chair. The question is not whether we are capable of violence. We clearly are. The question is what conditions trigger that capacity. And to answer that, we need to look at a second piece of evidence, one that comes from a completely different part of the world and a different time period. The pattern repeats, but with a twist. Let's travel from the Nile to the plains of North America. specifically to a site in South Dakota called the Crow Creek Massacre, dated to around 1325 AD. This is much more recent, about 700 years ago, but it tells us something crucial about the evolution of warfare. Crow Creek was a fortified village of the ancestral Mandan people who lived in earth lodges along the Missouri River. They were farmers, growing corn, beans, and squash, and they lived in a society with social hierarchy and trade networks. In other words, they were more civilized than the people of Jebel Sahaba. In 1978, archaeologists excavating a burial mound at Crow Creek made a gruesome discovery. The remains of at least 486 individuals, all killed in a single event. The skeletons showed evidence of scalping, dismemberment, and decapitation. Many had their hands and feet cut off. The attackers didn't just kill, they mutilated. And here's the key finding from the study, published in the journal American Antiquity in 1982. The victims were primarily women, children, and elderly men. The young adult males, the warriors, were largely absent from the site, suggesting they were either killed elsewhere or taken captive. This complicates the picture from Jebel Sahaba in two ways. First, it shows that warfare intensified with the advent of agriculture. Farming creates surplus, stored food, valuable land, and permanent homes, which are worth defending and worth stealing. The Crow Creek Massacre was almost certainly about resources, control of the fertile river valley, and the stored harvest. Second, it shows that warfare became more ritualized and symbolic. The mutilation wasn't just about killing, it was about sending a message. Scalping, for example, was a way to take an enemy's spiritual power, and it was common across many Native American cultures. But here's the non-obvious implication. The Crow Creek Massacre also reveals something about the psychology of dehumanization. The attackers didn't see their victims as fellow humans. They saw them as enemies, as threats, as less than human. This is a cognitive shift that evolutionary psychologists call moral disengagement, the ability to turn off our natural empathy for members of our own species. And it's a shift that can be triggered by simple cues: different language, different clothing, different customs. The same brain that evolved to cooperate within the group also evolved to hate outsiders. And yet, here's something that almost never comes up. The Crow Creek Massacre was not inevitable. Archaeological evidence shows that the Mandan people had lived in the region for centuries without such violence. The massacre occurred during a period of severe drought and resource scarcity, a classic trigger for conflict. When people are desperate, the in-group, out-group bias becomes more extreme. The same evolutionary wiring that helps us survive in hard times can also drive us to destroy our neighbors. So the question becomes, is there a biological mechanism that explains this switch from cooperation to violence? That's what we'll explore next, the brain chemistry of war. Here's the mind-bending part. There is a specific neurochemical system that governs our willingness to fight and kill, and it's the same system that governs our ability to love and protect. It's called the oxytocin vasopressin system, and it's one of the most ancient hormonal pathways in the mammalian brain. Oxytocin is often called the love hormone because it promotes bonding between mothers and infants, romantic partners, and close friends. But what most people don't realize is that oxytocin also promotes aggression, specifically aggression toward outsiders. A landmark study published in Science in 2010 by a team of Dutch researchers led by Karsten de Drew demonstrated this paradox. They gave participants a dose of oxytocin via nasal spray, then had them play a series of economic games involving cooperation and competition. The results were striking. Participants who received oxytocin were more cooperative with members of their own group, but they were also more aggressive toward members of a rival group. The same hormone that makes you love your family also makes you hate your enemies. This is the biological basis of what anthropologists call parochial altruism. The idea that we are kind to insiders precisely because we are cruel to outsiders. Now, let's connect this to the archaeological record. The oxytocin vasopressin system is ancient. It evolved in the earliest mammals, over 200 million years ago. In primates, it's been shaped by millions of years of living in social groups, where cooperation and competition were both essential for survival. The human version of this system is particularly sensitive to social cues, which is why we can switch from love to hate so quickly. When you see a stranger who looks different, speaks a different language, or belongs to a different tribe, your brain automatically categorizes them as other, and the oxytocin system primes you for defensive aggression. But here's the crucial evidence that confirms this mechanism operates universally. A 2014 study published in Nature examined the brains of people from 12 different cultures, from hunter-gatherers in Tanzania to urban dwellers in Tokyo. Using fMRI scans, researchers found that the same brain regions, the amygdala, the insula, and the prefrontal cortex, lit up when people saw images of outgroup members. The response was automatic, occurring in less than 200 milliseconds. This is not learned behavior. This is hardwired. And yet, here's the twist. This hardwiring is not a fixed destiny. The same study showed that the brain's response to outgroup members could be modulated by experience. People who had grown up in diverse environments, or who had close friendships with members of other groups, showed a weaker amygdala response. The biology is real, but it's plastic. Your brain can learn to override the ancient wiring. So, what does this mean for the origin of war? It means that the capacity for organized violence is not a bug in our software. It's a feature. It evolved because it helped our ancestors survive in a world of scarce resources and dangerous rivals. But it also means that war is not inevitable. The same brain that can launch a genocidal attack can also build a coalition of peace. The question is, what conditions tip the balance? To answer that, we need to look at the single most disruptive event in human history, the invention of agriculture, and how it transformed the scale and nature of warfare forever. This is so important to understand, because the shift from foraging to farming didn't just change what we ate, it changed how we thought about land, property, and other people. And it created a mismatch between our ancient biology and our new environment that we are still struggling with today. The turning point came around 10,000 years ago, in the Fertile Crescent of the Middle East. That's when humans began domesticating plants and animals, wheat, barley, goats, sheep, and settling into permanent villages. This was the Neolithic Revolution, and it was the most transformative event in human history since the emergence of language. But it came with a hidden cost: the invention of war as we know it. Before agriculture, hunter-gatherer bands were mobile. If conflict arose, one group could simply move away. Territory was vast, and population density was low, roughly one person per square kilometer. But farming changed everything. A field of wheat takes months to grow, and you can't pick it up and move it. A village of mud brick houses represents years of labor. Suddenly, land had value. Stored grain was a target, and the population density skyrocketed from one person per square kilometer to over 100 in some areas. What changed for ordinary people? Let's imagine a woman living in a farming village around 8,000 years ago. Her daily life before agriculture would have involved moving with the seasons, gathering wild plants, and hunting game. She would have known every person in her band intimately, maybe 30 to 50 people total. After agriculture, she lives in a village of 500 people. She has neighbors she doesn't know. She has stored grain that could be stolen. She has a fixed home that cannot be abandoned. And if a rival village decides to attack, there is nowhere to run. Who benefited from this new arrangement? The strong, the organized, the ones who could mobilize a group of young men to defend the village, or to attack the neighbors. Warfare became a tool for acquiring resources, not just for revenge or status. And the scale of violence increased dramatically. Archaeological evidence from Neolithic sites in Europe, such as the mass grave at Talheim in Germany, dated to 7,000 years ago, shows the same pattern as Jebel Sahaba. Entire families killed, including children. But now the numbers are larger. At Talheim, 34 individuals were found in a single pit, all killed by blows to the head from stone axes. Here's the mismatch. Your ancient brain evolved for small group living, where conflict was personal and limited. But now you live in a world of large groups, anonymous enemies, and resources worth killing for. Your oxytocin system still primes you to love your family and hate outsiders. But now, outsiders can be thousands of people you've never met. Your brain has no natural capacity to handle that scale. And so warfare becomes institutionalized. It becomes a tool of politics, of religion, of economics. The pattern repeats across every continent where agriculture was adopted. In China, the earliest evidence of warfare, fortified settlements, and mass graves dates to the Longshan period, around 4,000 years ago. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec civilization built defensive structures and left evidence of ritualized combat. In Europe, the Bronze Age saw the emergence of professional warriors, bronze weapons, and the first documented battles. The scale grew, but the underlying psychology remained the same. And yet, here's the part that affects you. We are still living with this mismatch. Your brain is still wired for a world of 50 people, but you live in a world of 8 billion. The same instincts that helped your ancestors survive a raid are now triggered by a political argument on social media. The same hormonal system that made you bond with your family makes you hostile to strangers. The question is, can we learn to manage this ancient wiring in a modern world? That's what we'll explore next, how evolutionary psychology explains your behavior today. Think about the last time you felt a flash of anger at someone who cut you off in traffic, or the last time you felt a surge of loyalty to your favorite sports team, or the last time you scrolled through social media and felt a wave of contempt for someone with a different political opinion. In each of those moments, you were experiencing the same ancient wiring that drove the attackers at Jebel Sahaba and Crow Creek. Here's what actually happens in your brain when you perceive a threat, whether it's a physical threat or a social one. Your amygdala activates within milliseconds. This triggers a cascade of hormones, including cortisol and adrenaline, that prepare your body for fight or flight. At the same time, your prefrontal cortex, the rational, decision-making part of your brain, begins to shut down. You become less able to consider nuance, to empathize with the other person, or to imagine alternative outcomes. You are literally less intelligent when you're angry. Now, here's the connection to evolutionary psychology. This response evolved to help you survive a physical attack from a rival band. In that context, it was useful to act fast and think later. But today, most of our threats are symbolic. A rude comment, a political disagreement, a perceived slight on social media. Your brain treats them the same way it would treat a spear coming at your chest. This is the mismatch in action. A 2018 study published in Nature Human Behavior used fMRI to examine the brains of people while they read political arguments. The researchers found that when participants read arguments that challenged their beliefs, the same brain regions lit up as when they were physically threatened. The amygdala, the insula, and the anterior cingulate cortex all activated. The brain literally interprets ideological disagreement as a threat to survival. This is why political debates feel so visceral. Your ancient brain doesn't know the difference between a different opinion and a different tribe trying to kill you. So what can you do with this knowledge? Here's the genuinely useful insight. When you feel that flash of anger or defensiveness, recognize it for what it is. An ancient survival response that is misfiring in a modern context. Your brain is not broken. It's just using outdated software. The moment you label the feeling, oh, that's my amygdala reacting to a symbolic threat, you activate your prefrontal cortex, which can override the automatic response. This is called cognitive reappraisal, and it's one of the most effective tools we have for managing our evolutionary wiring. But here's the deeper implication. Understanding the evolutionary roots of conflict doesn't excuse violence. It doesn't mean we are doomed to fight forever. It means we have to be intentional about creating environments that don't trigger our ancient fears. Diverse communities, cross-group friendships, and shared goals all reduce the amygdala's response to outsiders. The biology is real, but it's not destiny. And yet, the question remains. If war is so deeply rooted in our biology, can we ever truly overcome it? That's the final question we need to face. And the answer might surprise you. Let's go back to that ridge overlooking the Nile Valley, 13,000 years ago. You are standing there, watching the line of armed strangers approach. The smell of smoke and dust is in your nose. The sound of their footsteps is growing louder. In that moment, your ancient brain is doing exactly what it evolved to do: assessing threat, mobilizing your body for action, and categorizing those strangers as enemies. You don't have time to think about evolution. You just react. But now, after everything we've learned, you see that moment differently. You understand that the attackers were not evil in some cosmic sense. They were humans, driven by the same biological wiring that drives you: territoriality, in-group loyalty, the fear of scarcity, the hormonal push to protect your own. They were acting on instincts that had kept their ancestors alive for hundreds of thousands of years. And yet, the result was death. The result was trauma that echoes across millennia. Here's what this behavior says about what it means to be human. We are a species caught between two worlds. Our bodies and brains were shaped by millions of years of evolution in small groups, where violence was personal and limited. But our technology and culture have created a world where violence can be impersonal, massive, and global. We have the capacity for incredible cooperation, building cities, curing diseases, exploring space. And we have the capacity for incredible destruction: genocide, nuclear war, ecological collapse. Both capacities come from the same source: the ancient wiring that makes us love our own and fear the other. The truth about human nature is not that we are good or evil. It's that we are both. The same brain that can launch a genocidal attack can also build a hospital. The same hormonal system that makes you hate your enemy also makes you love your child. The question is not whether we have a dark side. We clearly do. The question is whether we can use our conscious, rational minds to manage the ancient instincts that no longer serve us. Here's the final thought I want to leave you with. The oldest war in history was not fought over ideology or religion or national borders. It was fought over resources: a river, a fishing spot, a patch of wild grain. And the people who fought it were not so different from you. They loved their children, They told stories around the fire. They felt fear and joy and grief. And then they killed their neighbors because they believed it was the only way to survive. We are still fighting the same war today. The weapons have changed, the scale has changed, but the underlying psychology remains the same. The question that haunts every human being, from the hunter-gatherer on the Nile to the politician in a capital city, is this: can we learn to see the stranger as a friend? Or will we always be trapped by the ancient wiring that tells us the other is an enemy? The answer is not written in our genes. It is written in the choices we make every single day. And that is the most hopeful and the most terrifying truth about what makes us human.